Hello there Voltage Modular people, PoohBear here and welcome to my channel. And I think this is the video that a lot of people have been waiting to see. This is really the breakdown of the heart and the brains and really the skeleton structure of my generative piece. I do actually refer to it as a hybrid generative piece because I have certain pattern elements going on. Yes, I do have randomization, which is driving a lot of stuff and that kind of thing, but I'm happier calling it hybrid rather than a real raw generative piece. Very quickly, you are actually looking at a photograph here. This is the original project I actually started off with. We're mainly going to be doing a deep dive into the latest version. I mainly brought this up is because obviously I have done videos about the drums. I've already done things about the bass. You've actually seen the latest pads because this is, as you can see, is a poly oscillator, poly filter, and everything's poly down in that particular corner. So I wanted to go over a few little things really in comparing some of the items in this one to the latest one. So I am going to be jumping all over the place and it is going to be a bit of a disjointed video because there's so many moving parts and there's so many parts which matter what this bit's doing to what that bit's doing to what this bit's doing. So it is all over the place. So as I said, the first thing I'm actually going to quickly jump on and have a quick talk about is let's actually have a look at sort of the drum area. Now, as you know, I've mentioned several times, my system was being pushed to the max when I was using this particular generative piece. So I was trying to come up with ways of being a little bit clever. And at the moment, obviously, I've got this drum little kick here. There's a bit of a kick here and a bit of a snare. And on the percussion, there was like two different patterns on there as well. I was thinking, right, I need to add another pattern onto that, and I need to separate them because at the moment it was playing one pattern, so it played this portion of the snare, and there's a portion of the percussion, like the percussion sort of sounds it was playing, and then it would flip over and then play this bit and it would flip over. So they were sort of playing these two patterns, and I thought, well, if I disjoint it for starters, so that means it could be playing either one of these drums to either one of them snares to either one of them percussions. Well, that gives you 8 variations straight away. But I was saying to myself, right, I want to obviously expand that out. I want a lot more. I don't just want these two little simple drum patterns. I want a lot more going on. So I had to come up with a way where I could say, fine, I've got to reduce what I've got in my project to give me some more CPU overhead. But at the same time, I want this extra functionality. So obviously I had to look out the box. It's no good me saying, yeah, I could get another flip-flop counter and I could wire them up with yet another sort of set of kick patterns, but that's using more modules. I've got to get to less and less and less. So I looked at this and thought, okay, I've got an idea. I actually outputted this particular pattern to the audio and I recorded it into Reason, and then I actually saved it as a MIDI file. So in the new project, we end up with something like this. So I've actually used a jazzy jukebox. So all this portion here has been replaced with this bit here. And the same with the snare, what was there, we've now got a snare. The big difference being is I'm now have up to 128 patterns if I want to do a kicks or snares and of the percussion as well. Percussion, you know, it's got exactly the same way. So I could go down that route if I want to. So excellent, I've met part of my own remit of saying I wanted to expand this. Well, I can do this with a jazzy jukebox. But the fact that I've recorded the kicks separate from the snares to the percussion bit, yep, they're now all separate. So at the moment I've got sort of 8 different variations of kicks, 8 variations of snares, and probably about 11 or so of the percussion. But we're talking about over 500 variations now that we can call on. The way they're being driven as well is totally changed. There's this thing called in Rand, which is one of my new devices, and yet that device came about when I was building this generative project. I was looking at it thinking, oh, if only I could sort of do this thing, I need to do that sort of thing. And yeah, this is where this device came in. So I can give it a simple trigger input. It's going to select from a particular range, it's going to output it, and actually it's output it in the keyboard range, which is then going to select a particular slot within the kick. At the moment it's in a unique mode which is called off, so it's purely randomized, that is. And so this randomization process could be made with a simple LFO with a random, using an attenuator to actually reduce the range down, and then use something like a DC source to then offset it. And you could actually do that, or you just take this and just twiddle a couple of knobs, and there you go, you've got your answer. In this one here, it's got the unique mode is on last, which means if it's actually selected, say like this pattern here, S07, it won't select that again because it's selected last. It'll choose a new pattern. But that one, it could choose the same pattern if it needed to. So we've got that going on, which is quite a bit different. And by removing, I don't actually get loads and loads of my overhead back by removing this, but I got some back. You know, so I reduced this down to obviously 2 sort of units. Yes, this does use a bit more memory because it's going to load up multiple MIDI files, but it's not a lot. But it's definitely reduced the number of modules that I was using. So quite a vast project, what we're going to break down. There's a number of components which aren't used anymore, but I've left them in here, so we will obviously touch on them because I made decisions why I removed them and why did I remove them. We're going to sort of start along here, work ourselves our way along, and then sort of come up a bit, and as I say, we'll be touching on things over here as well. Right in the heart of it, I have a start and a stop. Let's see if we can get rid of some of these wires. So all the red ones, they're basically going off to resets, or yeah, so they're actually resetting Jazzy Jukebox as well, so they're starting them up, they're resetting a lot of switches all over the place, and the one next to it is a stop, which is stopping most of the Jazzy Jukeboxes, and that's how you kind of quieten it down. I've also got a little bit going through the remotes. I think I'm trying to mute out the stereo mixer because obviously I've got a still bit of white noise which is sort of going in the background, and I have that lovely little feedback delay, so when it goes quiet the feedback comes actually quite a lot louder in the background because there's nothing to quieten it down. So it uses a envelope follower to quieten it down, so as the volume gets up the envelope follower will quieten it down. So yeah, so that's all that these two are doing in the middle. So you can see a lot of things wired up to this, and it's just anything you see reset and it's got a cable in it. Yeah, it's just the trig gate in the middle which is going to kick it off. So let's actually start off in the spot in the corner here. So this is the storing forward, which is I'm using as like a pulse. Originally, obviously it was driving all the drums and a lot more, and it's driving a lot less stuff now. Part of the pulse, and if you notice the CV is not connected at all. It just happened to have a 16-step pattern in it when I started this project, so I was probably playing around with the VM modules, with the storing forward, getting a little pattern going, and then obviously I went off and started my generative piece, left my storing forward here, but never actually cleared out the pattern it has internally, but I'm not using the pattern at all. So this could be just one step and just use the gate out. It's got 16 steps in it, and because it happens to be on the 16th note, I actually left it there because it's a good little counter, so I know exactly, you know, when we're dealing with 16ths, maybe where we are in the sequence, because it's got a reset and everything's resetting up. So that's just a funny thing I've done, which is, it works interestingly. So if I had an 8th, maybe I will turn this down to 8 steps, so it just gives me a simple little counter. But you don't need it, you just need one single step in this for this to work. And this is actually going out to another gator, which happens to be on the same channel as this gator, and it's also going off and it's driving the main, it's not driving the main leads, but yeah, it's contributing towards how the leads actually sound. These gators, what I've got here and here, if anything, they're acting like a clock divider. Oh, by the way, why am I using, say, storing forward over, say, a normal other device which can generate a pulse? Well, I've got my swingers on it, so obviously that pulse is coming out with a bit of a swing on it, which is a bit different, obviously, from using a normal generator. So my gators are working at the moment more as clock dividers, more than anything else, so I could put clock dividers in here, and as they stand, because of the way I am doing the timing, which I'd refer to as regular timing, I could replace these with proper clock dividers. However, if I was to say come along and I could do that, well, that means I've now divided my clock up into, well, a 2-step and a 6-step. So this is where gator, don't just think of gator, well, we're gating obviously any kind of data coming in, but yeah, I mean, obviously I'm dividing the clock down as well by using this, which could have different sort of steps, which you can't do with a normal clock divider. So you could use it in that manner, and I just happen to be using it as a clock divider. So this first one is going to be like half notes. This is going to be 4 measures, and the original one it's going off and dividing into another gauge up there. I think that's doing quarter notes, but we can come down to that. So that's all they're doing. So this is just sort of splitting the clocks off, and this one here actually is probably a very key one, this gator here, because it's firing off all the random stuff. We've got random stuff going on here, and it's firing off this flip-flop counter and this flip-flop counter, and this is probably a very important flip-flop counter, because this is the flip-flop counter which is deciding what bank of chords are we going to randomize from, and I'll talk about that in a second. So this is the problem with this generative piece. There's a lot of switching backwards and forth because you've got to understand some other components, or really what this component's doing, and yeah. So we'll have a quick look at that very, very soon. And this is an overall counter. So basically, if we scroll along, oh good, we can get it on the screen at the moment. So in my Jazzy Jukebox, I've got I've used up 49 slots, and they've all got just straight chords in it, 6 note chords. I've just filled it up with 6 note chords, and what I've done is I've made these chords, I'm not going to say I made chord progressions, but I kind of have, and I've put them in banks of 7. So I sort of came up with 7 chords and said, yep, I like them. I'm going to come up with another 7 chords which kind of work together. Yep, I like them. I'm going to come up with another 7. But I didn't look at any of the other banks. So I didn't say, oh, I've got to make this chord over here kind of fit in. No, that was one, that was another, that was another. So I've done that, as you can see, this many times. Ignore the last one. The last one happens to be randomizing all the banks, or all the slots, where these are actually going to be randomizing my banks of 7. So I think of it as banks. And this is going to decide, is going to cause a trigger after 28. So after 28 measures, this is going to get confusing. So after 28 measures, this actually fires off this randomizer. This randomizer will decide which switch we are going to open. And then obviously from there, we've got these individual randomizers, which are only randomizing 7 notes, I suppose, effectively, or say 7 values, which helps to cover the 7 slots. So if you notice, they're all staggered out, so they're all going up by 7, apart from the last one, which is the full 49 slots it can actually choose from. So yeah, so that's quite a key one of what that is actually doing. The way it works is also, let's see if we can get ourselves the mouse on it so we can get the cables up. So the way it actually works is quite interesting. Obviously I've got myself a full volt coming in here, so I'm using it as kind of a switch. When it's in its flip mode, it's holding the signal high. So even though it's going into a trigger, as I've said before, it doesn't matter if these my devices say trigger or gate. This is actually holding that gate high for 24 measures it will be. So then when this obviously flips into this 25th measure, it's going to flip into its flop. That 5 volt signal is going to drop to 0. Fine, doesn't affect them triggers, it's just fine. I'm going to stop there. And then it's going to fire off this envelope here. And this particular envelope actually is adjusting the cutoff frequencies. So I've got a couple of filters, and you hear it every sort of 28 measures. I'm putting in really the high pass and low pass filters, and make this on the drums and some all the deep stuff to make a roar, and then I start anew. The randomization all kicks in, changes the drum patterns, decides we're going to change it to a new 7 slots, and the randomization starts again. So every sort of 28 measures, it sounds a bit like you're getting a new kind of track, really, because obviously the drums can change that much, and then the groove of the bass all changes and everything else. So that's being controlled. So that's doing all that low pass stuff. And then obviously once it flips back, it hits that high note. So it hits that, takes this high voltage, and then that's where it triggers everything else off. So it's quite a powerful area, and it is getting fed really back into this flip-flop counter as well. So So this flip-flop counter, so the reason I'm saying it's getting fed back in is because it comes from here, does all this, triggers these off, comes out of this gate, and then that one's coming back over to this counter. And this counter could be removed. The reason I put this counter in here and I change it usually from a square to a forever and turn it down to a threshold of 1 is because as this stands, this will actually play in sequence every single chord in my jazzy jukebox, and then when it hits to 49 it goes into the totally randomization mode, and then it can actually, obviously in the mode it's actually set up, it'll actually flip back and then sequentially play each one again. So I said I put it in here originally and I'm changing my threshold numbers, so if I come up with 7 new chords I can slot them into the first 7 slots and I can hear them. I can actually make sure, yeah, is it actually fitting in with my generative piece at all, or are they just totally wacky, or do they work or don't work? So that allows me to do that. But it's an interesting kind of concept which I've actually sort of left going, so I'm getting a lot of randomization for, it'll be, I suppose it's equivalent of saying 28 measures times by my, and I'm using 8 slots at the moment, by 8 slots, which will give you, oh, I don't know, we're talking big numbers, and then it will actually go sequentially through and do the same thing. So it's kind of flip-flopping between them two. And you could say, well, that's partly why I call it hybrid, because I am then sequentially doing certain things, even though from these chords everything is sort of obviously randomized. Funny thing is, obviously I've got myself my jazzy jukebox, and I say all these chords are just a straight 6-note chord being played, and that is it. And I was going to demonstrate that by saying, look, hey, you can have a listen to it with my tiny voice, and so I added my tiny voice to demonstrate that. And I've now incorporated tiny voice into my generative project. I rather kind of like the sound that was going on. And I've decided to make its gate information, again, because it's playing a chord, I can get away of having a mono gate source come in. Obviously I've got to turn it to poly when it goes into the tiny voice, but it's coming from a mono source, which I'm then splitting out to control the tiny voice, because it's obviously hitting all 6 notes, and it gives it like a little stabby sound in the background. The gate I'm actually using for it is this toggle gate, and this is actually being driven from the first gator we saw back there, and it's also being driven by the kick drum gate. And because it's a toggle switch, obviously the signal will go high and turn it on. It's now got to wait for that signal to go off and a new signal to come in to turn it off. So it turn it on, kick again, turn it off, kick, turns it on, kick, turn it off. And the reason I've also connected to the other gate is because I thought, well, I might have a kick pattern where I might just have one kick only. So by having that other gate sort of gate of kick in, it would give it just that little bit more, I don't want to use the word variety, but yeah, it would just give it that little bit more, so I can actually have very not much going on with the kick if I want to. So as I say, purely just a simple little stab, that's all that's producing. It's just the 1 measure MIDI file of a particular chord, that's all that's playing. And as you can see, oh, there's the other little funny thing. If you notice, this particular jazzy jukebox is using the 1V 127, and the reason I'm using the 1V 127 maybe, which I didn't point out, is in this flip-flop counter. I'm actually using the counter itself, so this counter number, this is what I was really talking about, is coming into back into my own switch, and I'm using that to drive the jazzy jukebox. So this counter number here, which happens to be 34, if it was in the right mode, it would have been saying 34 over here, and here's that happens to be in the right mode. So that's tied up nicely for me for demonstration purposes. So yeah. So I'm then taking obviously my chord out. My chord is actually going into this splitter, and the reason I'm going into this splitter is because I haven't told a little lie. It is a 6-note chord, but I've also added a bass, and the bass note happens to be the lowest note out of these 6 chords, just obviously played in the lower octave, and I can strip that bass note out separately, which feeds off to my bass up the top. I've also got it, as you notice, feeding off somewhere else, and let's talk about that now. So originally I just had 6 notes, and this is where it's coming into. It's coming into, it should be coming into here. Oh, I got myself confused. Oh no, of course. Yeah, that bass is actually going off, and it's, I'm going to say it's irrelevant. It's actually doing something totally different, but I do want to talk about this bit here, sorry. What this is doing here is, this was the original setup where I had a pitch coming out, going into my poly converter, so it's taking the poly, putting it into mono, and then from there I pushed it through a low port. And what a low port will do, it give you the lowest value. So hence, I could take a 6-note chord, doesn't matter where I'm playing it, and this would give me my lowest value, which I could then take off and use as my bass note. You know, obviously I wouldn't just use that, I would take that and actually take a DC volt, or like a -1 volt, and shift it down an octave, or -2 volts and shift it down a couple of octaves. But that's how I was originally getting my bass notes, what I was looking for, because I had a 6-note chord, and this would strip it out. I decided to remove this purely, again, because I thought, well, if I'm going to go down the MIDI route, I can just add that bass note in. I can just save myself a couple of devices. I don't need to do that conversion, so that's what I did that for. Let's see if we can do a quick recap. So we've got a chord's come out, we've split off, we've also got a bass note which is split off, and now we've got the chord itself, which is here, which is going to 2 different places. If you notice, it's going off to my Arpeggiator, and it's also going off to this converter to put the MIDI into poly, and this is obviously going back, the pitch itself is going back to my tiny voice, because I'm using the pitcher, and the other part of the pitch really is going over to do the pads. These other pitch and gate data is actually going up to my first contact, and as I said earlier, that pitch is going off to how I was getting my lowest bass note. I'm also, as I said, going into the Arpeggiator, so my chord goes into the Arpeggiator. I've got an external clock, which is obviously clocking it. This up and down and random buttons, they're being randomized, and they're being randomized by obviously one of these remote controls. So I've actually got it's taken the randomization out of this LFO. I have to feed it in twice and have to have a positive and negative, because I can switch between these 2 options, what I've got going on. I've also got the hold on as well. This then doesn't go straight to an instrument. This actually is now going into this flip-flop switcher. This flip-flop switcher has got the holds on it, so it's effectively doing a bit of a sample and hold of the Arpeggiator. And this is really the key part, which is driving the lead. So this is really what is deciding what notes are coming through and playing that lead or not, what you can actually hear. It's sort of either blinking it on or off. The offset is obviously going to be going absolutely, as I say, going mad. So you can see it's going quite slow, but then it'll actually speed up, because it's coming from this particular LFO, which is having its frequency driven by this triangle from that LFO. So it's going to speed how fast and slow this rate goes, and obviously this particular offset is, if we move the weight over to this side, we're going to be more into the flip mode, so we're going to let more notes through. When we come over to the other side, it's going to let less notes through, and obviously it's going to slow down and fast and speed up as well whilst it's sort of doing that. So that's what that's doing, but it's such a key point of what it's actually delivering. We also do have one feed from this Arpeggiator, which is going off up to the bass, and we'll talk about that when we get a little bit higher up to the bass side. This flip-flop, so this, I say, this is really key on what it's getting, and this here, this flip-flop switcher here, is the B's coming from the original story forward, so it's getting this pulse in here, and we're flipping-flopping randomly, and as you can see, I've got my offset more set towards the flop than the flip, and we're also using it's coming onto this attenuator, but this attenuator is coming from this LFO, so it's also taking a feed from this LFO for whereabouts it's going to be on its weight. So it's taking its main pulse from storing forward, and then it's also getting a pulse from another gator I've got going, which is doing quarter notes, and I'm using the other trick of I'm taking a gate out of the percussion. So I'm taking a gate out of percussion, I'm taking a gate from the quarter notes, just in case the percussion is not doing too much. This one's going to overwrite it, and then we're flip-flopping that and taking that feed to drive the arpeggiator. So the arpeggiator is not just like a straightforward, hey, I'm going to give you a straightforward pulse to pulse the stuff out. Obviously we've got a bit of a swing on this pulse to drive the stuff out of that. We've also got, now we've got the percussion stuff which is coming down, using the gates from the percussion to actually also drive the arpeggiator. So you can hear the bass every now and then. It will speed up quite a bit in the way the notes are being spat out. And also, let's see, it says also, so yeah, so that's being flip-flopped between that, which is obviously driving that, as I said. Then we'll take that gate out and drive this, and then we will start to go up. So this stuff here is more to do with, I say, my feedback loop, and I am just happen to be using a triangle out of here. So a lot of gate information comes out of all of my jazzy jukeboxes along the drum route to drive different things. So the percussion jazzy jukebox is driving the bass as well. It's driving what notes we're going to be hearing or the gate of the bass. Obviously it's driving its own percussion stuff as well. And the other cables which are going down, again, I've got this, as I said, I've got this going outside to fire off external MIDI stuff as well. If we scroll across, as I said, you can see that this gate, so this is a snare which I mentioned, it's obviously driving its own flip-flop counter here, which I think we spoke about and we covered that actually. Or yeah, this was kind of covered in the drums, but obviously it wasn't using the jazzy jukebox to do it, so I am taking that gate, and this is just flip-flopping the panning. So, but the pan is going all the time, but you don't hear the pan all the time because of this other counter. So this counter will only hear this, what's going on with the panning, when this is actually in its flop mode. So when it goes to the flop, we can hear the panning, and then obviously it goes back to flip, and it's just a normal kind of snare sort of sound we're getting. Also, it's driving the pad, so we're taking the gate out to drive that pad sound. So I say I've got a stab sound going on, which is totally different, but we've also got this other pad sound going on, and I'm just gonna zoom out just a little bit here. A silly little key thing about jazzy jukeboxes is because obviously they're MIDI devices, they expect note and they expect gate data coming out for it to work. So if you just wire up a gate, you won't get anything out of it. It's going to say, no, I want 2 cables to actually work. So you have to put that to a dummy cable, using it in the sense I'm using it, as in I'm only using it in the drums. I don't care about the pitch data, but I had to wire it up somewhere. There's just a silly little thing which is going on there. And again, this is the kick. As I said, the kick is actually going off all over the place. It's not, you know, it's obviously it's doing the kick itself, but again, we've got it going off to multiple places. As I said, we're driving that tiny voice, and it's obviously going again to the mono poly stuff, which I'm sending out to my graphics world on the outside world. So as I say, what's going on with the percussion stuff is semi-important of how I sort of set the patterns up, and I've got to revisit some of the patterns because I say it has quite a big effect on what's going on with the bass as well. So I'm going to jump, as he says, I'm going to jump right over to this corner here so I don't forget about what's going on over there. So what we've got over here, this was originally attached to the bass. In fact, I've been through a couple of different scenarios of what I was doing with the bass to try and get different kind of pattern sounds going. But so here's a couple of food for thought, I suppose, is the best way of thinking of this little section over here. So say it's not being used anymore. But one of my original thoughts is to use the in-rand in a what I call an all mode, and these are all coming from the same feed. It's actually coming from the pitch out for the bass, and these 2 feeds I had coming out of the Arpeggiator. So you could say I've got effectively, and don't forget this is randomizing, and this device is randomizing which switch is open. So I've got myself a ratio of 3 to 2. You know, obviously I could have had 4 to 1 if I wanted to. But I had this ratio of 3 to 2 in an all mode, which meant every single port will be touched randomly. But admittedly, the bass didn't quite sound right to me because of the way it was suddenly randomly bringing in the Arpeggiator. And yeah, it just didn't quite sound right. I wasn't happy with the result it was getting. Now, I also tried this with the in-rand and had it on, obviously this unique word in off, so this was acting purely as a randomizer. So now I'm randomizing things, but because obviously I've got 3 of some and 2 of others, you've got more chance of hitting the 3s than you've got the 2. You know, it's just principle. But then my head was saying, well, if you ever come up to a scenario where you've got just 2 separate inputs, well, you can just use a flip-flop switcher, because obviously we got the weight and we can change that weight and that ratio around, so we can actually even do slightly finer ratios than what we've got here and what we're doing. So that's just a food for thought of why I might use the flip-flop counter, say, then over this method. But as I said, with this method in the all mode, well, I can't do that with the flip-flop counter, the switcher. I have to, you know, that all mode does sort of change the randomization and how it's working incredibly. So using that method would then work. So let's actually jump to the bass as we're talking about the bass of what we was doing. So here's the bass, and it is, oh, this is quite confusing of what's really going on, and there's quite a few different moving parts. You could say, here we go, this is quite simple. I've tried to label it nicely. The bass source. So where is the source coming from? I've got this in range, so this is taking its stuff from the ARP directly, and obviously the notes are being all over the place. So the first thing I'm going to do is put them down so they're within a particular, below a particular octave. I'm more interested in getting them below this octave rather than above, because the Arpeggiator is always playing high. So this bottom value, to be honest, is totally irrelevant. So I'm putting them all down, great, and then I'm putting them into my counter. I've also got a box standard feed, and this is just telling me what the bass note is, by the way. So this is just telling me what the bass note is. Don't forget that Arpeggiator's going off, arpeggiating. I don't care about the gate side of the Arpeggiator, and so this note here, which is coming here, is quite a constant note, or a constant value, should we say. We're then using this flip-flop counter, which is being triggered by this counter over here, which is being fed by these 2 gators. So you could say the gators are running at different speed. One is sort of running at, God, let me get this right. This is probably running, these are actually in measures. So I've got them in 4s, so that's 4 measures. So as you can see, I'm obviously triggering 1 out of 4 measures, and this is obviously going twice as fast. So if it's going twice as fast, it's just going to make this counter go twice as fast. And when it's on its first, in its flip mode, because it's in a flip-flop mode, so for the first 3 counts, it's taking the box standard data, and then on that very last kind of measure, we're flipping over, and we're then taking the data from the ARP, and then we flip back. So it's obviously doing just a 3/4, and it works really, really nice. As I said, when I had the randomization trying to do this, it just didn't sound right. It just sounded off. It didn't. You know, I know generative pieces, but I wanted to make something a bit funky. You know, that's the whole point of this generative project. I wanted to make a bit more funky, and I think I've got that from it. I think it's got a nice groove to it. It's got a lot of things going on with it, and so that's what this is so hard to explain what's going on, but that is really all it's doing. It's flip-flopping between the up and the main bass coming in, and it's changing its speed. And this is controlling the speeds. We then take that data and we put it through our octave flip-flop. So I've obviously got this one, which is also flip-flopping the octave. So it's taking that values, putting it here, and then shifting it down an octave. And you know, this is being again triggered That's being triggered by the percussion, I think. Let's see, we got that. Yeah, so it's being triggered. So depending if we're playing high or low, it is being triggered by the percussion. But don't forget, the percussion, this is on a square, so I've got to have 3 pulses coming from this gate here, and it's going to be in one mode, then another 3 pulses coming from this, and it's going to put it back into the other mode. So it's not going really mad with the percussion. It's obviously it's flipping flopping slowly. And at the very end of the bass, I've got the bit where it does flip flop between your panning. I'm doing a quite hard panning with it as well. So there's a lot going on, say, with the percussion stuff as well, which is coming into the bass side. A slight difference, and the new update to First Contact is I've now got -10, +10 octave range knobs on this. So if I had an input of C-2 here, I can actually push it right up to the C8 would be at the top, so I can actually transpose it all the way up there. Obviously I can transpose it down and make it disappear, but there's no point in that. So I had this nice wide range because I found myself that because I wanted to get all the notes of this playing, might not be, as I say, precise, but I just wanted to see things lit up to say, right, that is actually what is playing, not in the correct octave, but I can see exactly what's playing. And I was always getting these DC volts and offsetting the pitch and all the rest of it, and I thought, oh, I might as well just do it inside the device, and that's what I'm doing. This spanner is doing a lot of modulation. And the modulation, I'm not going to go into too much detail, and the reason I'm not going to go into too much detail really about the modulation is because it's down to your own kind of choice what you wish to modulate. You know, one of the big things, as I think I mentioned in some other videos, is I'm modulating like the panning quite a bit on a number of devices, and I'm also modulating the levels. So by modulating the panning and obviously the levels, I can bring sounds in and out. So it gives it a bit of movement. A number of these are obviously going down to the remotes, so the remotes themselves are then obviously coming up and they're controlling all kinds of cutoff filters and envelopes. They're doing all sorts of other little bits and bobs down below. I might be using this particular value in conjunction with other LFOs as well, but as I say, because that's modulation, I'm not going to touch it because that's a preference thing. It's a bit like I've done the sound design, but the sound design is a preference thing. You go off and you create your own sort of sound design, but I just decided, well, for fullness of this video, I covered it. You know, one thing like the spanner's doing, it's changing the volume level just on this amp, which is obviously doing the formant filter on the pad. So the formant filter is not always loud on the pads, it's coming in and out. So that's the kind of thing we've got going on all over the sort of place. I'm obviously attenuating it down here. This is probably on something like, let's see, I've got a value going through this flip-flop counter. Good, you see, you've got to follow it all the way through. Oh yeah, so that is actually doing a panning. So I had to set this up. I had to take, rather than my pan going directly to this one here, because it's doing the snare snare's got a slow pan on it, a very slow pan. But then, as I say, when this gets to go into its flop mode, it's then taking the values from here, and the values from here happen to be a hard -5 to a +5, which then obviously makes the pan really go flip flop right over to one side to the other, and then it flips back to this, and it's taken that CV data to do the panning over on this one. But I'm having to attenuate it down because I don't want the full signal from the spanner going into this, and I can't attenuate it actually on the control voltage, because you might say, oh, I can attenuate it here, because obviously that's what that is. But no, I need that because I'm doing also a hard pan as well. Oh, so that's why the flip-flop counters came into play. One thing I was going to point out with the attenuators on the from the VM series, obviously we get the attenuator which comes with nucleus, and it works quite well. But what I like about this is it's got a minus and it's got this plus built onto the knob, which in itself, fine, it doesn't mean much, but if you actually automate this, yeah, it's fantastic, because you can't really apply that same kind of automation onto the one which comes to Nucleus, because it's got a little button to say if it's negative or positive, and so your modulation would have to work out if it's at 0, we're going to have to push negative and do funny things with it. But no, this, because it goes plus or minus, I just thought I'd point that out. I found that to be really handy, and also very quick, without having to keep hitting that button if I wanted a negative value or not. So that's just saying I really sort of picked up on this attenuator, and I'm tending to use these more now than the stock stuff. I think we kind of got it. As I say, they're then filters which I was talking about, which close in and out every sort of every 24 bars. They will start to close. In fact, there's a delay on that envelope I'm using. So towards the end of probably the 28th. 27th to 26th, 27th, 28th, around that sort of mark, you can start hearing them filters close and open up. So I think I have actually covered absolutely everything which is key to this kind of project. So thank you for watching, and bye for now.